And a big hello to everybody there at Stanhope. It's Graeme Anderson here from Agriculture Victoria in Geelong. My sincere apologies that I'm not there face to face. I wish I could be today, but I'm down in East Gippsland. So I've put together a bit of a recorded slideshow which runs through long-term rainfall history and some drivers about climate variability. So I'd just like to point out our seasonal risk team. Some of you might know some of the products. We've got the Break newsletter Dale Gray puts together and soil moisture probe stuff that Dale Boyd does. We also run a whole bunch of regular webinars on climate. We probably speak at 140 forums a year. So a lot going on in that space. But if you want to see some of those products and learn a bit more about some of the other web tools we've got and posters, just head to that website. Now, here I'd like to give a bit of a plug for the Climate app. It's fantastic. You can have it on your phone or on your desktop, but you see all of these dots here. It's basically allows you to tap into a long-term rainfall history that's been recorded. So it's a great tool developed by the Managing Climate Variability program. So I've just downloaded it for Stanhope, and you can get this sort of a thing where you do how's the season's progress. So I've just set it for starting from January last year. Each of these blue lines are individual rainfall years, and this thick blue line is the long-term average, and then the red line is how you're tracking for your current year. So you can sort of see last year a slow start, then growing season was all right for a bit, but then that spring really tailed off. So you can reset it to start for this year or what you want, but it's a great tool. And also the Climate, it's got another feature called How Often. So if you want to, everyone's looking for the autumn break and when it's going to happen, but if you want to just check what's happened in the past, this is a really good way to do it. So for that Stanhope record, I've just gone, how often do we get more than 50 mils over a 14-day period in the months of March to May? So it'll tell you how often that's happened in the past historically. So no matter what else happens, understanding what's happened in the past is a pretty good guide. So it's a good tool to start with. And here's just a map of looking at 2019 for the rainfall for the year and how it compared to history, in deciles. So this colour designates where they got average rainfall. Decile 1 is where rainfall was in the equivalent to the driest 10% of years. Decile 10 where rain was equivalent to the wettest 10% of years. But you can see largely a lot of Victoria was drier, some average areas down south, Decile 1 up in your part, and also have a look at how much of Australia had its driest year on record. That was pretty remarkable. Now, what we've got here is just a longer-term record, rainfall record for Stanhope, and basically it goes back to 1922, which is this line here, and you've got rainfall millimetres up the side, 200 mil, 400, 600 mils there. So the long-term average is 445 mil, which is that line through here. But you can see some years wetter and even above 700 mil, and other years where it hasn't even made it to 200. So a lot of variability in that long-term record. Of the last 20 years, there's been 15 drier and 5 wetter. And you can see some sort of drier phases in the past, and then some sort of runs of wetter years there in the 50s and 70s. So if you look at that last 20 years, we can certainly see the last 2 years have been pretty dry, and that's to do with the Indian Ocean dipole and its dry phase. And we'll talk a little bit more about some of those drivers of climate variability. Also, here's just that Stanhope rainfall for summer, autumn, winter and spring over that long-term record. So you can sort of see a lot of variability there. Perhaps in terms of autumns, a bit drier in the last sort of 20, 30 years. Is not too bad though for the last 10 years. Winters have been a fraction drier, and probably what stands out is amongst springs in the last 10, 15 years, there's been quite a few dry ones. Now, where does all of that moisture come from to make rain? So to make rain, you've got to have moisture, and this is one really key image. It's showing precipitable water across the planet. And what you'll notice is that most of that moisture is along the equator where the oceans are warmest. It's where a lot of the cloud is. And so seasonal forecasters watch these areas like a hawk in the Pacific Ocean and the oceans to our north and the Indian Ocean. And some years the pattern's set up where all of that moisture is somewhere else on the planet, and it's hard to get that moisture feeding into weather patterns. And then some years it's all sitting around us. So that's really at the heart of seasonal forecasting, is keeping tabs on where is most of the moisture lining up this year. This is a great little map. You can see here southeastern Australia, and here's Antarctica. But key drivers behind our wetter and drier years. So we've got the El Nino Southern Oscillation. Some years there's lots of moisture coming from that, and especially in La Nina years. So 2010 and 11 is a famous one with lots of moisture barreling into us. The Indian Ocean Dipole, it also has wetter or drier years, and sometimes these two can team up. So 2010, 11, they were both in their wetter phase, and say 2015, they were both in their drier phase. So they can team up. And you can see these cold fronts whizzing around the Southern Ocean. That's driven by the Southern Annular Mode. Really important triggers for rainfall in southern Australia. So you need a wetter years when we've got more moisture floating around our part of the world, but also plenty of triggers to make it fall out. So they're really they're the key drivers that a lot of the forecasts are tracking. Now here's a new tool. It's called the Local Climate Tool. You can find it at our Forecast for Profit website. I've just got here the rainfall record since 1900 from nearby at Elmore. But basically it shows the long-term rainfall, but what's color-coded here is actually the years when a climate driver was active or in an active phase. So what's interesting, you can sort of see here, here's the color positive IOD years. You can see a few of them there, and here's a couple of them the last 2 years. See that wetter year when the IOD is in negative, 2016 stands out. The 2010 La Nina and IOD combination is this darker blue, so you can see them stand out. And what sort of also jumps out is some of these much drier years are when you've got an El Nino in combination with a drier Indian Ocean dipole. So it's a really good tool. Go and have a look at it and can shed a bit more light about what's influenced historical rainfall in your district. And of course that then leads into seasonal forecast, because it's sort of asking, well, what are those climate drivers doing this year? So really important to look at how these climate drivers actually influence our upper catchment runoff flows. In fact, what happens to rainfall is amplified in terms of the impact on runoff flows. So by way of example, along the ranges, we've got some upper Murray here, the Midamura River, looking at August to November flows historically, and we're just looking at what's happened in El Nino years, that rather than a third of those years being low runoff years, actually 2/3. It doubles the chance of having a lower runoff year when you've got an El Nino. The same with the Indian Ocean dipole when it's in its dry phase, really has quite a strong influence of increasing chance of lower flows. Higher flows, increased chance in La Nina years and IOD. So pretty much those climate drivers' fingerprints are all over not only farm rainfall, but also the runoff in our upper catchments. So there's a bit going on in the forecasting world. I'm just going to share a few products here, and this is about understanding seasonal forecasts, and there's a forewarned farm product which is working on better products for farmers. Now I'll just talk about a little bit about interpreting seasonal forecasts. So here's the bureaus, and they've put out their now multi-week and seasonal forecast, which looks at, say, the next 3 months, and here and you'll see some of these maps. So I'll just talk a little bit about making sure we're understanding forecasts. So here's an example of the current forecast that the Bureau's got for the next 3 months, from March to May. This was issued on the 13th of February. You can see these sort of maps, and they give a probability of above or below the chance of exceeding median rainfall. So you can see here, looking at this area here, a 40% chance of exceeding median rainfall. So, but that's also meaning a 6% chance of less than average rainfall. But there's a little bit more devil in the details. So basically the same data runs. So imagine that if they've run the forecast, they've looked at sea surface temperatures and where the cloud is, and they've run the models for the next 3 months. And out of 100 model runs, this is sort of what's happening. This is sort of showing the spread of the model runs for March, April, May for somewhere like Shepparton, not too far away. So you can see that decile 1, 2, 21 of the models landed there, 33 of the models landed in decile 3, 4, 19 of the models landed in decile 5, 6, and only 10 of the models landed in decile 9, 10. So it sort of gives you an example. That's basically, it's the same forecast, but it's just a different way of explaining it. And so often even, and a key is sometimes you might see a forecast where it says 50% chance of above or below median. A lot of people say, oh, that just means average. Actually, it doesn't quite mean average. It means often that there's as much chance of decile 1 as there is of decile 10. So just important that when we're reading these seasonal forecasts, we understand what they are saying and what they're not. Just for comparison, if we look back at these forecasts in September 2019, there were 51% of the model runs were landing in decile 1, 2. So, some years there's a much stronger signal than others. At the moment, it's all looking, it's a bit unpredictable what will happen, which is often the case in autumn. Now, for a one-stop shop of making sense of forecast, the Fast Break newsletter that Dale Gray puts out with AgVic is a ripper. Basically, each month he puts this out. He looks at not just the Bureau's seasonal outlook, but he looks at the outlooks from the US, the UK, Europe, Korea, Japan, all of their seasonal forecast models, and he puts them on this graph and basically looks at Victoria and says how many are thinking average, how many are thinking wetter, how many are thinking drier. So this is the current one he's just looked at. See, there's 8 there sitting on average and there's 4 there sitting on the drier side of the fence. So it's a really good, simple way of getting a bit of a heads up of what's going. It's interesting, if you look at last spring, we actually had, for a couple of the months, all of the models that he looked at had us on the drier side of the fence. So some years is a much stronger signal than others. So what I've talked about is a lot of variability. Now I'm just going to cover, is there anything different to long-term natural variability? So now here we've got maximum temperature deciles from 1910 going through each decade of the last 100 years. And you can see blue is cooler than average years, and yellow is warmer than average years, and orange is warmest on record. So you can see there's a lot of temperature variability there in our history, but you might notice there a bit of a trend in recent decades. So that was predicted. There's extra heat being trapped in our atmosphere because of greenhouse gases. We're at the start of a warming trend that's going to continue for many decades. So while rainfall variability will continue, we're basically in a process of squeezing in an extra month or 2 of summer. So that's something that is a bit different to just normal variability. Yeah, and here you can see this is for Southeast Australia, maximum temperatures for summer, for autumn, winter and spring. So they've all got increasing trends. There's still quite a bit of variability around there, and so milder winters can be probably helpful for pasture growth. But this one, you can see spring in the last 10 springs has been quite a few, between 1, 2 and almost 3 degrees warmer than average. So that's summer turning up a month earlier. So that's what's a bit different to just normal variability. Now, another thing that's a bit different is just the pressure pattern over southern Australia, this region here. So you can see since 1950 up to recently, pressure varies from one year to the next, which is variability. But what's been happening is we've been having an increasing pressure trend. And what that does is it just squeezes out the odd bit of rainfall in some of those years. Now, that's a trend that's expected to continue in future, which is why we're expecting to have some dry years thrown at us in future. And I would just like to have a bit of a chat about the difference between weather forecasts and seasonal forecasts and climate change projections, and where we're more confident and where we aren't. Weather forecasts basically go out to 8 to 10 days. They're called deterministic forecasts, and they'll predict what the weather's going to be like on a particular day, temperatures, what rain you might expect, wind and all of that. So they're all good. Just be aware that there's different models, and sometimes for some weather events there's the models don't all agree, so sometimes that's important to know when they're more confident and when they're not, so to get more than one opinion. Also know that while they can forecast thunderstormy weather on a particular day, they've got no idea where actual individual storm cells might start. That only happens an hour or two before. So sometimes with our rainfall we can get a lot in those thunderstorm events, but they're not quite as predictable a few days out. Important too, seasonal forecasts, what's sort of happening with them is, depending on how oceans and cloud patterns are set up, they run the models for the next 3 months and they give you these probabilistic forecasts. No one actually knows what's going to happen, but sometimes those weather patterns can be really heavily skewed, especially in years when there's a really strong climate driver away. So some years seasonal forecasts offer a lot more value than other years. So, and if anyone's telling you they know what's going to happen in the next 3 months, then they're pulling your leg. So just be wary of that. Also, with climate change projections, there's a lot of confidence around those trends of increasing heat. There's an increasing temperature because there's increasing heat being trapped in our atmosphere, and that's 90% of that heat's going into oceans, so that's something we're going to see a lot more of. What happens is basically as things get hotter along the equator, we see a poleward shift of weather patterns. So for our part of the world, we see weather patterns sort of shifting south. So there's a high degree of confidence around that, but there's a lot of uncertainties, especially around how it will affect some of these key drivers of our variability. I'll also just point out too, there's this website, there's some good local climate guides that the Bureau of Meteorology just put out. They're little 4-page fact sheets on looking at weather in the last 30 years. So there's some, I'd recommend them to have a look at, just to look at some of the local trends. So just some more resources and tools. Rob will point you to this one. Extension Oz got a really good website. And you'll see lots of stuff there, like the weekly irrigation requirements, all that stuff. You're probably already getting that, but just making sure you know about it. They're really good resources. So no matter what happens in the future, I mean, we've got seasonal variability and climate change in the mix, so that's going to give us plenty of challenges with dealing with a bit more variability and plus increasing incidence of drier and warmer. But I guess there's a lot of things that are in our favour, and this is a lot of the things that are being applied across farms in all districts. And we've got modern tech, R&D, genetics, innovations, all things that can really help us do things more efficiently and do them better than we have before. Also, there's been a heck of a lot of great work on improved on-farm and regional infrastructure around, water and fodder and how we better deal with that increasing variability. So there's plenty more we'll be needing to do there. There's a lot of work we've got to do on biosecurity, and really important because that work enables us to keep access to global export markets. And while they're growing, the biosecurity is a really key platform for keeping them open. This is probably a really important one though, with the business volatility from year to year. It's not just the weather, but also with market volatility, that has a really big impact on businesses. So getting good skills and financial skills around how you handle that variability is really important. And often some of the most valuable things that are done on farms for setting them up for longer term future is around what happens in the good years and what you invest in that actually helps you ride out the tougher years better. A lot of great work happening with farm planning and setting up the health of our farms a lot better. And the important thing, which is why you're there today, is learning, sharing information with other people. Make sure you're tapping into good knowledge and turning up workshops like that. And they're all the things that help you make sense of a changing world and confidence to invest and make you better off in future. Anyway, I hope that has been useful. If you need any more information, just drop us an email or head to the website, and all the best for the rest of your workshop.